Hi, my name is Emily Stump. I'm the owner of Sweet M's Cake Shop here in Goshen, and this is my mom, Kathy, who is also a part of my business.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to start to show you is how to begin your project from the very first steps. One of the things you're going to need to do is cover a cake board for your cake to go on. When you need to do that, you're going to need 3 boards. And you're going to need to tape them together so they won't split apart when you want to cover them with the covering. So you have tape. Then it needs to be nicely covered all the way around. So you're going to want a pattern like a bigger cake board to use a pattern to draw a circle on cake board cover, whatever you choose to use. This is called Florist Foil. We have this in many different colors. We invite you to come in and purchase it from us if you'd like. You can also find it in the craft stores locally, but this is what we use in our cake shop. You've drawn your pattern. You'll take and cut the circle. Many judges like to see a very neatly covered board. I know that you don't always see that part of it, but it really does help you to have a much neater looking project and have a good presentation. And you want your cake to look as nice as possible as well. All right. So you have your circle, and then we like to put it with the white that will be facing up or down, if you will, when it's covered, so you'll see the white. And what you do is you take and pull it a little bit tight and pleat with your finger as you go. You'll start with one side and go to the other so that you don't end up scooting your board out of place. It helps you to get it centered evenly. And you'll just work your way all around the board as you do this. And if you give it kind of a tug, it will kind of naturally pleat. And you can tape it down as you go. I'm only going to do half of the board for you. Maybe you'll get the idea. What you want to go back is fill in with pieces of tape, because where you have these loose spots, when you start to work with your cake and you move it around, those could catch, and then your board cover will rip, and then you'll be back to square one having to recover a new board. And I'm sorry, moms, but what I usually say is you get to waste the tape this time. Moms are always about don't waste the Scotch tape, but you'll want it all covered completely like that, okay? So you would go ahead and finish out the other side is what you would do. All right, next then you would want to hot glue your form onto the cake board. The rules are really important for you to read. It gives you sizes of cake and styrofoam that you can use. The office has those for you to purchase. Please do so. It's a good resource for those. They have those for you, as well as the cake boards to put the cake on. They recommend, I think, an 8 or a 9 inch being a popular size. That's what we have here. It's an 8 inch. And how we recommend you put it on the board is with hot glue. You don't normally do this with a cake, of course. There are some things very similar you do in cake decorating, like a real cake. Other things we pretend a little bit more with. glue, and if you can center it with your eye on the board, it works. Otherwise, you may want to take and make little marks on your board somewhere, some way to make sure that you get it centered on the board very well. But you should end up with something that looks like this. It sticks, you're good. It's not going to scoot around as you try to ice your cake. Next, Emily's going to show you how to ice the cake.
Right. So we use a turntable that spins. It makes it easy to ice your cake, decorate it. So I recommend getting one of these. And then to ice your cake, you'll need a big bag. You can use disposable or you can use reusable ones like these, cloth bags. And inside is a big tip that we call it an icer tip. It's about this size and it has just a flat edge so you can squeeze the icing out. So next you fill your bag, so you pull the bag back and put icing in. You don't want to fill it too much, otherwise you may not be able to squeeze it out and it will just come out of your bag the wrong way. So then I twist it a little bit and that keeps the icing secured in an area for you. And then you just place it against your cake and turn and squeeze. And now I need more icing, so I do this part again. Now there was a little bit of icing left in the bag, so now there is an air gap in here. So when you squeeze, it's going to come out really quickly. So sometimes I just squeeze it out there. And there you have the sides all covered. And I'm going to do this again, just squeeze out what I have in my bag on top. And then we use a spatula that's angled like this to ice the cake. And I start on the top and I get it as smooth as possible. And I push out icing to the edge of the cake. And then I also use the turntable to spin it. And then I wipe the excess off back into my icing bowl. Keeping your knife clean is important. It will help you ice the cake easily and it won't be as frustrating. So I go back and that edge that I pushed off, I try and smooth it out and use it to smooth the cake on the side, fill up any holes maybe I missed. Clean off my knife. When I have it as smooth as I can with this spatula, I then use one of these, I cannot remember what we call these, bench scrapers, or even a bread cutter, right? Anyways, I use it, I try to hold it as straight as possible, and I use this to get the whole side of the cake evenly straight and smooth. And I do the same thing, I wipe off the excess. Alright. This part sometimes takes the longest, but it is important. It makes overall your cake look the nicest and the neatest. So take time doing this part. But this is as smooth as I can get it. And then I pushed up a ledge on top, so I go back with this and I scrape it off. Have to be gentle with this part. Otherwise you'll just push it back down to the side of your cake. there you have your cake iced. The next part will be smoothing your cake, and if your icing is too soft, you'll need to let it crust or stick it in the freezer or refrigerator to get it firm so you can do this part. So I'm going to set that one aside and get another one I have chilling. Good. Alright, so I use paper towel actually, and I use Viva brand because it doesn't have a texture on it, and I just lay it on the cake and I use my hand to rub back and forth. Not too hard, but just enough that the heat from your hand is going to help smooth out any messy spots. And I peel it off and I put it in a new spot, or I check and make sure I got it smooth and go back. So there are many ways to do smoothing your cake. This is the one that I found works for me. You can also take your knife and put it in hot water, wipe it off, and while it's warm, use it to try and smooth out any lumps and bumps. That I found to be harder for me, but maybe it will work for you. So either way, use a method to get your cake as smooth as possible. Sometimes it gets too sticky and I have to get a new piece. And then I go to the top and we smooth out the top. And sometimes you'll maybe push too hard and make a little bump on the edge, so I go back and I do the very edge and make sure that it is nice and smooth and straight. That will help you when you're putting a border on to have a nice smooth edge, not one that goes all over the place. Okay, I think that's about as smooth as I can get it, so that is that part. Next, what is the next technique?
You're ready to decorate the cake, and so it would be learning the parts of your decorating bag. You can buy these as a disposable product, or there are ones like Emily used to ice a cake that are cloth like this. You will also need a coupler, the two pieces. And when you put this in the bag, it allows you to change out different tips using the same bag of icing. So you don't have to make a new bag every time you want to use a new tip. So what you do is you insert the larger part of the coupler into the bag, and you're going to cut off the end, enough of it that you can get the coupler to come out of the bag. And then you're going to find the tip that you want to use. This is a writing tip I'm going to put on here first. You put it on the end of the white coupler, use the ring to screw it on, making sure you catch the plastic bag under it. So it's important not to cut off too much so you have some of that left. So then you have your bag ready to go. Fill with icing and do some decorating. So now that you have your cake iced and ready to decorate, think about how you'd like to decorate it. Any project you have, you think about what the finished product should be. You have a theme for it. Cakes are one of the funnest things to think of to do. Birthdays, anniversaries, baby showers, just for fun, you name it. The sky is the limit. So pick a theme and you can take paper, draw out your idea. There's books to look at. Internet, of course, is always a good source today to give you ideas of what you'd like to do for your cake. So when you begin to think about how you're going to decorate your cake, you really are going to need to refer to the rules that you were given when you signed up for the project. These papers are very important to read and take note of. As a beginner, you will see that it requires certain size cakes as well as a minimum of 5 beginner level skills to be demonstrated. These sheets are what will show you what you can and cannot do. It's a very handy chart to follow with the X's that show what is in the beginner techniques. The ones that do not have an X are not allowed as a beginner. The judge will take note and look at all of that, usually scores down if you do a technique that is not allowed. So you will want to pay attention and do only those techniques allowed for your level. As you look at through the different pages of techniques you can do, it will help you to plan your cake to say, I need a border. What 2 techniques maybe can I use for a border? I need to do writing. I see that I can only do printing at beginner level, not cursive writing. Star-filled pattern is another technique allowed. And you can easily see how you can reach your 5 techniques that the judge will require you to do.
Alright, here we have some blue icing that I will fill this bag with. Again, don't fill your bag up too full. It will be very hard for you to handle it and properly use the right pressure. So, whereas there's more room to fill it up, don't do that. Twist it, and then I like to make sure that I can wrap my hand around most of the bag. Then I know that I can properly squeeze it and it not be very hard. Alright, so one of the first techniques will be doing a star-filled pattern, and I have a cookie cutter I'm going to use, and this is a cupcake. So what I do is I just try and center it on the cake and press down a little bit and make a cupcake imprint on top. And then I'll use that as my guide. So we have a writing tip on here, and that I will use to draw lines with. And we're going to make the cupcake paper part first. So I just drew that bottom part of the cupcake, and if you saw, I held my bag up and I started squeezing, but then I let it fall into place. And I stop squeezing and then I pull away. I'm going to make a few more lines. So, kind of filled it in to add interest, but we're going to go back. We're going to take this tip off, so you unscrew that coupler and drop that tip out and get a star tip, which has little tines on it. And actually, I don't use this smaller ones. We're going to use this one. There are many different sizes, so sometimes you have to play around and figure out which is the best size to use for your design. But you just hold the tip and bag straight up and down, close to your cake, and you squeeze a little bit, stop squeezing and pull away. And then you do one right beside it, trying to be as close as possible so you can fill in the gap. The goal is to not see any of your white cake underneath your pattern. So there is my first row done.
This is again called,
I'm sorry?
it's called a
Star-filled pattern. And doing a neat job is important. The judge will look at that. So take your time to make sure they look even, and one's not really tall and one's a little short. Alright, so there is the bottom completed. So next we're going to make another bag.
Right.
Yes. Okay. And we're going to put another coupler in. Okay, so we have another writing tip that I'm going to screw onto the bag. And it's important to roll your bag down. It really does help you get your icing in your bag easier. And then you squeeze it down into your bag and then twist. And you can also use, just tie your rubber bands to keep that held in place if your hand can't hold it, but it helps to do that. And again, I'm going to draw the top part of the cupcake using that drawing line method. And there is the top of the cake, and we'll switch out for another star tip. And fill in the icing part of the cupcake. So holding it straight up and down, you just squeeze, stop squeezing and pull away. And I like to follow the line that I drew first. I think it helps keep the shape of your design really well then. And then I go back and fill in the inside, remembering to try and keep them the same size, the same height, and fill in all of the white areas. If your tip gets messy, wipe it off. It will make your stars look messy if you have a messy tip. And there, we have the top of the cupcake finished. To finish the cupcake, I'm going to use a big star tip and do a swirl. That is also a technique you're able to do. I just hold the bag straight up and down, and I'm going to make a circle motion. And there it is on top. Now, the next thing we'll do is write our birthday message. For writing, it's really important not to fill your bag too full. Otherwise, you'll find it really hard to write and it will be all scribbly instead of straight. So if you think you have too much in, you can squeeze some back out. And make sure that your tip is clean. There's no icing clinging to it. And you can either try and freehand it, or you can also use something like this. It's called a 2-in-1 tip tool. Sorry. It's a 2-in-1 tool. It has this flat end, and you can use it to scrape things off or poke it, or also has this end that is like a pencil and you can draw with. And I just lightly mark my lines And if I think that I might have messed up, I just go back with my paper towel and smooth it out. And it erases your lines and you can try again. Getting your wording spaced on here is really tricky. Sometimes using the trick of starting with the letter in the middle of the word helps, but using your eye is definitely something you want to remember to do. So, to write, you'll hold your bag straight up and down, and again, just get it started so it's touching the cake and sticking, and then you're going to draw it and let it fall into place. Stop squeezing, kind of, dab it away till it lets go, and do your next line. So for that line I made, I had to turn my bag to another angle to get it to pipe right. And then I have a little tail sticking up. So I'm going to take this tool and try and poke it down so it's as neat as possible and it looks like the letter. In writing on cakes, you have to do one line at a time. You can practice on wax paper or just a flat surface, but it is important to practice writing on your cake because it is different than just writing on something flat laying on the table. Your arms will be higher, so they may wiggle. So take time to practice both ways, on a flat surface and on a cake. Crazy. I don't know if I'm gonna have a straight line or not, or it look right. But if it's not right, you can always scrape it off. You might have to put some more white icing back in that space. Let it crust or harden and then smooth again. So make sure you give yourself plenty of time to complete your project because it may take you longer than you planned. So there is happy birthday. The next thing would be a border on your cake. We're going to take this blue, and it still has a star tip on it, and that is one of the best tips to use for many different borders. And I'll show you a shell border. And it is important to start with your bottom border on a cake because if you try to go do the top, you may end up messing it up when you're doing your bottom border. So for a shell, you will just start squeezing to get it attached to the cake, and you'll let it build up. So you'll kind of pull away and let it build, and then you'll pull it towards yourself, squeezing a little bit, and then you'll stop squeezing when you make a tail and pull away. And there you have one shell. The next shell, you'll want to start at the end of that tail and do the same thing. Start squeezing and let it build up, and keep squeezing and pull it back. And there's a second shell. And keep practicing because you'll want to try and make them as even and the same size as possible. And the more you practice, the better you'll get. May take a while, but soon you'll be able to do this part very quickly. It's important to turn your turntable so you're at the right angle to see and to pipe. And again, it's really easy to do if you have the right amount of icing in your bag. So it may mean extra work of stopping to refill it, but it will be worth it because it will be much easier to do this piping and these techniques. So I filled it up and I got an air bubble in the bag, so I squeezed out the icing until that air bubble came out. Because otherwise, if you're doing it on your cake, it may explode all over your cake. And then you'll have to take this tool and try and clean it off each little spot. And that's not fun. I'm using both hands, one to squeeze and one to kind of steady myself. And if you make a mistake, just stop and use this tool, or if you have a small knife or even a toothpick, and you can scrape it off. And I usually try and use the board as a guide to scrape it off neatly. And so there, it left a little bit of blue, but that's all right, it will get covered up. But if it's too high, you'll want to take this and make sure you get all of your icing scraped off so it doesn't look messy and there's no mistake seen. Great, and there you have the bottom border done. Okay, for the top border, I'm looking at my techniques that I can do, and I'm going to choose another one for the top, and I'm going to choose rosettes for the top border. To make a rosette, you'll want to hold your tip straight up and down and get it attached to the cake by squeezing a little bit, and then make a circle motion, keeping it very tight and squeezing until you come back to where you started and pull away. There's usually, when I make them, a little bit of a tail. So I try and push it back down under a little bit just so it's a little neater and you don't have a long tail sticking out. You want it to be a little round, tight swirl. And that is a rosette. So for the border, you'll need to do these all around the cake without any gaps. So when you're making them, try to make them as close as possible. And making them the same size. So this may take a while. You may do one wrong, and you'll want to take it off. Keeping your tip clean again. I saw mine was kind of messy. And there are some rosettes, staying pretty consistent, so I'll keep working at it. And I'll try and keep my tails nice and hidden. And for the border, it really should be half on top and a little bit over the edge. So it's right, this edge right here. They don't want to see it right on the top. It needs to kind of cover this area right in here. And you can go fast, but that's usually when you start getting messier and inconsistent. So take time and go back and look at the ones you made and make sure they all look the same, they look neat. And then continue. It would be easier to stop and take off one than get done and realize that that one looks really bad and try and take it off in the middle of them all. And I had a tiny air bubble, and so it needs to come off. It made a messy rosette. Cake decorating takes a lot of concentration and time practicing, but once you get a technique down, it's a lot of fun, and to learn other ones and just be as creative as you can. And so there is the border. Then you want to look at your scale sheet and make sure that you have 5 of them.
So according to the rules, basic color blending is a technique. That is when you've added your food color to your icing to make your colors. Paste colors like these are recommended. These are big bottles. They also come in smaller bottles. You can find them in the local craft stores. Using the food coloring, that is the little squeeze bottles that we all decorate Easter eggs with, is not recommended. It takes far too much of that to make coloring, so you'll want to invest in some of the little bottles of paste color to make nice colors. So we have basic color blending being a technique. Then in the borders and side decorations, we have the rosette and the shell border. So we have 3 techniques. Another technique would be the fill-in, the outline and fill-in, which is what the cupcake is, with the star fill pattern. And then we have the writing, being the lettering, as a 5th technique. She's added the rosette on top just to be an additional technique. It says 5. Sometimes you'll want to think about what maybe more could I add in case one of my techniques for whatever reason goes wrong and the judge says I can't allow that as a technique. Then you won't be lacking any, and it's always interesting to the judge that you've tried a little something extra maybe to that, so it's always maybe a good idea to do that kind of thing. Let's talk a little bit about icings for your cake. You will want to make your own icing. Don't use the pre-made from the store purchased icing. You were supplied with a sheet as well when you signed up that has icing recipes on it. There are several different you can try, the Wilton Special Buttercream icing or the double batch reusable frosting. Either one of those are good recipe. We found the most success with a double batch reusable frosting, but you might try the other one as well just to see what you like better. Sometimes the directions have also directed you to ice cake with a royal icing that has meringue powder in it. We actually do not recommend that for your display cake. The judges do not mind that it is not that icing used. You will find the buttercream technique, like Emily showed you how to ice a cake, to be the best kind of icing to use for that. So it takes a little bit of work, but it will be well worth it to make your own icing. It's fun to do and a technique that is actually counted on your sheet when you've learned to make icing that has the proper consistency.
For an extra technique, I'm going to do a side decoration and I'm going to do dots. So I'm going to use a small writing tip, and to do a dot on the side of the cake, you'll just squeeze until it touches the cake and keep squeezing until you make the size of dot you'd like, and then stop squeezing and pull away. And I'm going to try and do an overall pattern. So I do a few and I stop and I look and I make sure they're all the same size. And if it happens to pull away and not be a dot, you can take your paper towel and let it crust a little bit. And then I fold it over to make a little edge, and then I tap it down. And I get it to be right, a little more flat, not so pulled away from the cake. You can also use your tool to poke dots to give yourself a pattern to follow if you don't want to just do it by eye. Because sometimes that does take doing many cakes and practicing. Making sure you have the cake turned to you so you can see what you're doing is important. Trying to do it when it's way over here, you may not make it the right shape or the right size. Okay, and so there we go. All right, that is a cake completed. All right, we're going to do some more techniques, just some different ones that you can do. And so to start out, I'm going to do flowers. And on your list, you can do drop flowers. And there are two different kinds. It shows that you can do a one squeeze star or a swirl. And I will show you how to do both. So I'm going to switch out my tip to a drop flower tip. And it looks kind of like a star, but it has a center, a dot in the middle, and that helps make the drop flower shape. And I think I need to put some more icing in. Too much isn't helpful, but too little sometimes isn't helpful either. And I'll squeeze out that air bubble that's in there. And for drop flowers, you'll want to make sure your tip is clean. It won't make a pretty flower if it's dirty, has a lot of icing all over it. So there, cleaned it up. So for the first one, the one squeeze, all you'll do is hold your tip straight up and down and squeeze, stop squeezing and pull away. And you've made that flower. But in order to call a flower, it must have a center. So I'm going to switch and use this blue and make a center with a round writing tip. And all you do is just squeeze a little bit into the center, stop squeezing and pulling away. And there you have your flower. So the next one is a little trickier. You hold your tip straight up and down, but as you're squeezing, you're going to turn. And it's going to swirl it. I'm going to try another one. That's better. My first one wasn't very swirled. And again, you'll want to put a center in the middle. And there is the other kind. It just makes the petals swirled a little bit instead of a star like that first one. So those are those two flowers. The next is a rosette, which we'll need to switch back to a star tip. And you'll make it like the rosette border, but just on top of your cake as a flower. You start squeezing and make that round circle motion until you come back to where you started, and you stop squeezing and pulling away. And then you will add a center. To it. And that is a rosette flower. Or it says with a star center, so you can also use a star tip. And you'll want to be sure to use a smaller star tip than the one you made your rosette with. So rosette flower, there we go. And I need to tap down my tail so it's smooth there. And then take that star tip and just straight up and down, squeeze a little bit into the center and pull away. And that is that one. Okay, another flower is a rosebud. And this is a new tip to use for these. It looks like this. It is flat, but it has a wide bottom and it gets skinnier towards the top. And to make a rosebud, you'll want to keep the wider end down to your cake and the skinnier end up. And all you do is start squeezing and draw and curve. And it looks like that. Kind of like a question mark, the starting of a question mark. I guess it depends on if you're left-handed or right-handed which way your curve will go. But for the next petal, you're going to start it on the side where your curve is. And it's towards the bottom of it, but you start squeezing and leaning it in towards it so it will grab a hold of your tail and cup as you squeeze. Then I push down a little bit and stop squeezing and pull away. And that is a rosebud. And this just takes a lot of practice until you can get that motion down, that curve, and then that second petal, which is just leaning it in towards the bottom of your curve and squeezing, pulling down and stop, pull away. Next flower is a sweet pea. Using that same tip, keeping the wide end down and the skinny end up, you're going to make like a shell motion. Just squeeze, go up a little bit and come down. So squeeze, go up a little bit, come down. And then right beside it, but at a little bit of a different angle, so angling out away from that one, you'll do the same thing. I start my tip right about in the middle of that first petal, and I start squeezing, pull up, and come back down. And then you go on the other side and do the same thing. And that is a sweet pea. So those are the flowers, some of them that you can do. And then we're going to go back up and do a leaf with your drop flower. And there's a special tip to make leaves. The one I'm going to use is a 352. It kind of looks like a snake tongue or a V. But you do have to hold it at the right angle to make a leaf. And the right is where you can't see that V in the tip, where you just see the top of the tip. So to make a leaf, you'll go right beside your flower and start squeezing and start then pulling away from yourself, towards yourself, I'm sorry. Stop squeezing and pull away. And there is a leaf. So I'm going to add leaves to all of my flowers. That is a good thing to do so the judge knows that it is a flower. So they'll count that technique for you. And then to finish off the rosebuds and the sweet pea, I take a writing tip. And at the base of the flower, I just squeeze a dot. And if you want a stem, then I just draw a straight line coming out from that dot. So there's a stem with like a calyx part of the flower. And you could even add a leaf then. Like that. So I'll finish out all of these flowers. By putting that ball and then stem and a ball and then a stem. Alright, so those are flowers. And then another technique is, in special effects, is grass. That's very easy. It's just a special tip that they make that has a bunch of little holes punched in the top. And for grass, if you're putting it on top of your cake, you just squeeze straight up and down and pull up and stop squeezing and pull away. And it makes a little tiny cluster of grass, so you can do it beside it, all around, and make a patch of grass, or just do it beside your flower to make it look like your flower is in grass, that kind of idea. Very easy to use. Sometimes you have to clean it off. If it gets clogged up, then it won't pipe nice pieces of grass. It'll all come out as a clump. So make sure your tip is clean and all the little holes are cleaned out, so it won't squeeze out. You can use it as a border. And that's where you'll have to angle it a little bit differently so you don't run into your cake, but you still just squeeze, pull up, and stop squeezing. And that is a grass tip border. You can have fun and even pull it out and make long grass on the side. To make long pieces of grass. You can even do that on the side of your cake. Kind of draw it up the side of your cake. Well, if it stays. Sometimes it can be messy and then you have to clean it off. That's good. Grass. And what's next? There are some borders. The first border is a C motion, and you'll want to use a star tip. Yeah. And to do this, you'll want your hand angled towards you this way. And draw a curve and stop and pull away and do another curve, kind of like a half circle. Kind of almost like a rosette, just not a full rosette. And there is some more. Then the next is, let's see, a zigzag is what we'll do. And that is just making a back and forth motion close together with a star tip. So you'll start squeezing and go in, then come right back out, and back and forth, and back and forth. Sometimes you may have to stop, take a breath, make sure it's staying even, that you're not making too big and getting small. But there is zigzag border. The next we'll do is shell with a writing tip. And you will want to use a round tip. I'm going to use a pretty large round tip. And all you do is start squeezing, let it build up, and then pull it towards yourself, squeezing. Stop squeezing and pull away. Then at the end of that tail, you'll start again. You'll start squeezing and let it build up. Come down, pulling it. Stop squeezing. It's important to make sure that you cover up the end of your tail so that it looks neat. And that is a shell with a writing tip. Then you can also do a ball border, which we're going to just use this big tip here. Clean off my tip. It's important. And all you'll do is just squeeze, make a ball, stop squeezing and pull away. And then do one right beside it. Keeping them even and making sure that they touch so there isn't a gap. And many times you'll get these little pulled out drops on top. So I go back and I take a paper towel and I push them down so they don't have those big tips on them. All right, next is you can do a leaf border. So the same tip that you use to make leaves on flowers is what you'll use to make a leaf border. And so to do that, you're going to make a leaf away from yourself. One leaf at a time. So there's my one leaf. And then I'm going to go back and do one behind it, making sure that I squeeze enough to hide the end of my first leaf. And there is a leaf border started there.